Another Marvel movie. Ah, just kidding. This one's actually pretty good. Peter Parker is an ordinary teenager living in Queens with an extraordinary secret. Fighting crime in his neighbourhood in a homemade suit, Peter is picked up by Tony Stark and taken to intervene in the airport fight in the events of Civil War. That's where this movie picks up. But once he's home, the excitement wears off and boredom starts to set in. That is, until he realises that somebody is selling black market alien technology in his area. I'm going to talk about some spoilery stuff throughout this because I'm aware this review is a little late and most of you have probably seen it already. If you haven't, I recommend you watch it before you watch this review. The first thing that really struck me about this film was that the plot actually has structure. You know, it has like beats, acts, stories, set pieces. It's not just a meandering mess of exposition or a set of linked fights without any proper character motivation. It starts off a little messy but with good intentions, I think, when it shows the villains realising that they can make this technology, then years later, them working on it, then it cuts to Civil War, then it cuts to 2 months later in Queens, and by that point you're feeling like, just get on with it. Once the movie's settled in a little bit into its plot and its pacing, it links its structure very directly to set pieces, which is kind of how a blockbuster should work. I mean, you've got the first Vulture fight, you've got the truck heist, you've got the Washington Monument moment, you've got the Staten Island ferry, and then you've got the finale. It's a little lumpy and the pacing can be a bit weird because you've got to cut between this really like high-octane superhero stuff and this teen romance angle. But I think that's a problem that every Spider-Man movie deals with, and it is a common issue for the blockbuster overall. The movie's not exactly surprising until the third act, which I think is the best thing that the movie does. After all this build-up of how determined Toomes is and how powerful he is as a villain, as the Vulture, and also the build-up of the romance between Liz and Peter, where you really want it to work, Peter goes to pick up his girl for homecoming, and who should open the door but Liz's dad, Toomes, the Vulture. That's a great twist. It's not at all easy to see coming until you look back and you realise that he talks about his family and stuff, and you're thinking, how's an idiot to miss that? But most importantly, it allows them to raise the stakes for the third act, which I think is a really necessary thing to avoid that sort of blockbuster droop that you often get for that last big CGI-heavy fight. As far as Peter is concerned, I think it's a great take on the character. It sort of mashes up a lot of different versions of him, like the early 60s comics and some of the animation as well. I've seen a lot of praise for the Vulture, for Toomes, for Michael Keaton's performance overall. I think he's a good villain in the fact that he's just scary and you really believe in his prowess, and you also understand his motivations. I feel like a really good villain reflects something about the hero as well. So if you look at the Joker, he's kind of the opposite of Batman. If you look at Two-Face, he reflects a lot of stuff about Batman's political motivation and his understanding of crime. Does Toomes really do that for Peter? Not really. There's a bit that they've put in a lot of the trailers, for instance, where the Vulture's like, me and you, Peter, you know, we're working class heroes and the guy upstairs doesn't want us to succeed, and really we're like Robin Hood and we're giving power back to ourselves. And that just doesn't land for me. I don't think they've really established it that closely. But I think that Keaton's performance is really good. I think the character is better performed than it is written. It's like he gets given a little bit in the script and then he really runs with it and turns it into something great. And I think that the scene in the car outside Homecoming is an excellent example of how to have a villain-hero moment in a film. I think it's a really good one. I think in general this film really matches the comedic tone that Marvel have applied across all of their films really now. Mostly because it is sort of designed for that. Spider-Man in the comics is a comic relief character. I think I talked about this in my Civil War review, but one of the things I really didn't like about that film was that everyone was comedic in it the whole time. Everyone's just quipping constantly. And if you read the comics, it's not really like that. They have different personalities. Spider-Man is one of those quippy characters. So for his movie to have a comedic tone, that makes sense to me, and I think they landed it here. They had the right mix of comedy and raising the stakes when they needed to. I think one of the things massively in the favour of this film versus a lot of Marvel's recent output is that I think Spider-Man is just genuinely a good character. I think he's got enough depth, but not too much, that he fits well in a superhero kind of milieu where everything is quite black and white and quite simplified, but also he's fun for the audience to watch because he's funny, and a lot of his struggles reflect a lot of struggles people live through. You know, he is this working class guy from Queens who has an amazing ability, and I think that's quite relatable. It doesn't feel like what you've had recently with the leads in Marvel films where you've had, I don't want to be too harsh, but like a scraping of the barrel, basically. Where you've got a whole movie about Doctor Strange, who I think is really not that great as a standalone character, or Ant-Man, who has a similar sort of problem. This is Spider-Man. He's an iconic comic book character, and I think that's really important as a reason why the film is successful. As far as the execution is concerned, I don't think there's anything completely astonishing in this film. The direction is pretty competent, there's nothing like amazing to look at, but some of the visuals tie together quite nicely. Probably one of my favourite things about the film is that it feels like it takes place in a consistent lived world, which is Queens, basically. If they're in high school and they're sneaking around, the chess club are going to see it in the background and be like, what's going on? There's a kid running around in a mascot costume. It feels like a lived world, and that's something that I think the directing and the rest of the creative team have really worked on, and has actually paid off really well here. So while it's not particularly distinctive or beautiful, I think they did a relatively good job here. And it's important to note that Jon Watts is essentially an unproven talent. He's made 2 feature films before. I haven't seen Cop Car, but I've seen Clown, and I thought that was kind of fun. I thought it was an interesting idea that was played out relatively well. There's nothing incredibly offensive in the film, and if anything, I think it's a good example of how you can widen out casting quite radically in movies like this and not affect the characters or how they work. You know, Flash Thompson is still a dickhead even if he's not this bulky white dude like he was in the comics. I laughed a couple of times in the movie and I wanted the characters to succeed, so I think it ultimately worked on the basis that I really want the blockbuster to work on, which was that it was appealing to an audience member in a mass audience screening. Nothing in Homecoming feels brand new. It might be because we're talking about one of the most adapted superhero stories ever. I mean, you've had 5 movies that are about Spider-Man in the last 20 years, and this is the 6th one. But that said, it's a solid example of a blockbuster, and in particular, a good Spider-Man movie in its own right. You know, if we talk about those 5 films, 3 of them at least are not good movies in any real sense. This is a good movie. This is very watchable. The major thing that I really liked about it was that it felt like the right way to do an extended universe movie. When Marvel announced they were going to start widening out and having all their films linked together, I thought, that's amazing, they could do some really interesting films. And by and large, instead of doing that, they've basically done this soap opera thing. Like Civil War is a 2-hour long of like, he said, she said, let's have a little slap fight. This movie takes a really interesting concept, which is like, what happened to all that detritus after the end of a superhero fight? And who would capitalise out of that? And it's telling that the worst bits of this film are the ones where it directly interacts with the Marvel Universe, in the sense that it's the scenes where Tony Stark shows up. In particular, almost the last scene in the film is Tony Stark and Pepper Potts just hanging out, and that scene feels out of place very deeply, and I think that's evidence that that's the wrong approach for this film and probably the wrong approach for the extended universe overall. I want to see more movies like this, small movies where they barely interact with the main universe and something significant happens but it doesn't necessarily move on the plot of the main universe, like a sideways story. That's what I wanted from an extended universe film, and I think that's what this one does. Maybe that's Sony's influence, maybe that's because this is one of the first films in forever where it feels like Kevin Feige hasn't been completely in control of everything. I'm not sure if I want to give too much credit to Sony considering their track record, but it's something to consider. It's not a thoroughly amazing movie. It didn't grab me and stay with me in the way that Logan or War for the Planet of the Apes did, but I'm very happy to give it a 4-star on the blockbuster scale. I can't work out exactly what that sticking point is. I feel like it hits some of the notes but not fully, or maybe it's just me not being used to seeing a Marvel film that's actually good. I'm not sure, but what I am sure about is that this film is worth the time that you will spend seeing it, so you should go and see it. One more thought before I finish. How ham-fisted is it of them just to insert Pepper back into the story after her and Tony apparently permanently broke up in Civil War? They're like, oh shit, that tested really badly and Gwyneth doesn't mind doing another film. Let's just whack her in a cameo here just so we can have them literally pretend like they're going to propose to each other. That's so typical of Marvel's not giving a shit about character development. They're like, yeah, we'll make a massive choice just because, well, fuck it, we don't really care, we need something to motivate Tony for the movie. And then we'll just go back on it. It doesn't matter. No consequence. It's totally fine. So that's my review of Spider-Man Homecoming. I know it might be surprising and probably kind of confusing that I liked a Marvel movie, but hey, it's a good film, so I'm not going to just dick on it because I didn't like, say, the last 5 in their sequence. If you've got anything you want to say about the movie, let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to find out more about what you think about it. Don't forget to click the like button and then hit subscribe to get the next review when it comes out. Have a good one. See you later.